The Food and Drug Administration saying it is reviewing a petition to ban red dye number 3 from being used in things like candy, drinks, and other food products. The FDA says the additive, which is used in thousands of products, is safe to consume, but critics have raised concerns about the dye being linked to health risks. The agency says it will review the petition and potentially act on it within the next few weeks. Dr. David Shaker from Shaker Medical Group joining us now. You know, first let's start with the political side of this really quickly. We know that the new incoming administration has its eyes set on changing things, but it almost seems as though the FDA is working ahead of it, as if it knows it's coming. What do you make of all of this, Doctor?
So it's interesting. This is not a new conversation at all. I mean, we have about 9 food dyes that are approved by the FDA in the country to use, and that largely hasn't been changed since the 1960s. The new FDA director, who's expected to be Marty Makary, he's a very research-oriented doctor. He's going to review the information and see what safety really means in terms of what we can use in our foods. What's interesting about this is red dye number 3 comes from petroleum, and it's in our foods, it's in our supplements, it's in some medication. It's actually in a lot of vegan meat, so that's something to be careful with. And then it was actually banned from a lot of cosmetics in the late 90s, which is interesting that it's still in our foods, but it's banned from our cosmetics. So that's something to be considered of. Yep. And then to top on that is that the European nations have outlawed it. It's not allowed in Japan. It's not allowed in China, the UK, Australia, New Zealand. Something makes me feel like we might be a little bit behind schedule here.
Yeah, I have been, ever since I was a toddler, I have had to ask if the candy or food I was about to consume had red dye in it, because we were banned in our house from having red dye when I was a little kid. So that's forever ago. Why are we just now getting to it, Doc?
I don't know why we're just now getting to it. I can't necessarily comment to that. It's important to note that the research studies that have come out have showed an association with cancer, but only in animal studies and not translated to human studies. So that's something that's definitely going to be reviewed. What's more important is exactly what you touched on, Joe, and this is a plea I have to a lot of parents everywhere. The red dye number 3 has really been linked to hyperactivity in children. So if you've got a child who's being diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and you're really hesitant to give medication, let's start from the sources. Let's start from the causes. If you can eliminate red dye number 3 from the child's diet, from the candies, or any dye for that matter, it's not going to hurt them if they're not using it. It's not a nutritional thing. And yes, it's lawful and it's legal. That doesn't necessarily entirely mean that it's good. So let's start by trying to remove that before we jump to the knee-jerk just medication. There's a huge value add there.
All right, Dr. Shaker, thank you. Let's move on to topic number 3 here and continue with your expertise here, because some are saying that starting with new research, it shows that consuming too much sugar could actually increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, which, while increased sugar in general could point to a higher risk of harmful heart health, scientists say it's sugary drinks especially that could lead to those health risks, including stroke, heart failure, as well as an irregular heartbeat. The findings are published in the Frontiers in Public Health Journal. Dr. Shaker still with us here. Look, sodas. We've talked about the ban of sodas at school, and I think this is especially what they're looking at specifically. Again, to your point, there are so many places that prohibit the consumption at a certain age of these things. Why is this everywhere in our diet? And I don't want to speak for you, but I'm assuming you have patients who are harmed by these things and their diet and their weight, etc.
So we'll go back to exactly where we started on the last topic. It's actually Dr. Marty Makary who's going to become the new FDA director, who talks about this pretty significantly in his book, Blind Spot, which is a good read for all patients and doctors just to review what's going on in medicine. Essentially, what we're talking about here is inflammation caused by carbohydrates and sugars. That's what's particularly bad for blood vessels and cardiovascular disease. People think that it's just cholesterol that's pooling and slowly closing the blood vessel. That's not exactly what's happening. You're getting a little bit of a rupture, almost, and a scab forms from that inflammation, and that inflammation is highly caused by sugars and carbohydrates. You can also see a lot of that inflammation in inflammatory diseases, musculoskeletal issues that cause aches and pains. Reducing the sugars, reducing the carbohydrates protects the body from inflammation, secondarily preventing from the cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, and just general body aches and pains. People feel better when they're reducing these food particles.
Got you. Let me ask you a question. Is there a difference between pure cane sugar, high fructose corn sugar, and all these other different kinds of sugars, date sugar, palm sugar, blah, blah? Is there a difference in how our body sees these things and reacts to them?
So there's a big difference between all of them, and certain things will affect one person different than another. I've got a simple slogan that I've been saying to patients: if you make your own food, you'll be healthier. I rather than broadcast what's specific, I say try to avoid things from bags and boxes. Try to avoid things that are processed. Try to avoid things that you don't exactly know what's fully embedded in all the foods. If you're going out and you're buying your chicken or your steak, or whatever it is that you're making, people used to make everything they eat, and now we're just so quick. We're just so quick with our food, all fast food. You just assume that that's going to be bad. How much of that is part of our diet? We can't assume that it's not affecting us on an ongoing basis. Yeah. Same concept I had when I was talking to parents and saying, hey, try to avoid these dyes from your food. Same thing. We don't need to be told by doctors or medical professionals that these things are bad. We feel the effects of them on a regular day. Don't wait to be told it's bad. Just try and eliminate them where you can. Absolutely. I think the last portion of things is that this bad food is cheap. And so I don't always feel, I do rather feel bad for patients who are overworked, who are stressed out, who may have not very high incomes, and then end up defaulting towards cheap food. Whole Foods is very expensive. Fast food is very cheap. Yep. There's a real global issue there, and we need to be discussing it more.
Dr. Shaker, we've got to go. A great conversation. We'll have you back on to continue it. In the meantime, stay with us. DMV Zone back after the break.